that happen?
Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if this is your first time. If it is the first time, please have a little delve around and see what the past videos can offer and see if you like that. And if you do, please subscribe to the channel. Massive thank you to the people who have subscribed. This is a book video called 10 Books That Made Me. I think I might go over 10 books, but hey, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So I've seen a bunch of people do this. So recently I saw Alex from Alex on the Bridge do it. But before that, I saw Brian from Bookish do it. I saw Ollie from Criminology do it. I saw Pat from Book Chat with Pat do it. And their videos are awesome. And I will leave the links below to their videos. I've probably seen other people do it as well, but those are the ones I can remember that I'd seen do it. And it's quite an old tag, actually, because I know there were some people who did it 2 years ago that were booktubers I don't watch. So they're probably really good as well. But anyway, I'm going to give you books that basically created this thing that sits before you. And I'm trying to do a cutoff point. So it stops in my early 20s. So clearly I'm a lot older than early 20s now. And there are other things that steered my reading and made me a whole person ever since then. But literally, it would be 20 books or something if I did it properly like that and went on to later years. So I'm putting a cut-off point, and even with me put a cut-off point, I know I'm going to go over 10 books. So the tag's called 10 books that made me, but I don't know if it'll be 10 books. So most of the books I'm going to include I still own, but there are a few that I don't own anymore, which I'm going to mention, and I do a little picture up here. So to start off with, I thought it would be good to talk about the first book that really got me reading voluntarily, you know, because obviously you read stuff at school. But the first thing that was a book that I read myself out of choice that, to be fair, blew me away. But it was a novelization of something I was already fully in love with, and that was Star Wars. And that was Alan Dean Foster's novelization. So it's credited on the cover as being by George Lucas, but it's actually written by Alan Dean Foster. So yeah, he's a good writer. But ultimately, I absolutely loved revisiting that as a boy. I remember I read it in Cub Scouts, so I can't remember what age I was then. What age was I then? I don't know, I can't remember. But when I was a Cub Scout, I remember reading that in camp, and later on reading other novelizations while I was a Cub as well. So that was the first kind of thing that got me into reading. And then, nothing to do with novelizations, there was The Stainless Steel Rat. So I've talked about this before on the channel, and this was a very, very important piece of work for me, partly because I loved it so much that I couldn't wait to get to read other books like it. And and this was more important than the novelizations for getting me into reading, because it was an original piece of work, and it was exactly the right kind of tone and pace for me at the time. And I've always been very affectionate about this series because of that, because it basically, this series really, more than anything else, made me into a reader. So thank you, Harry, and thank you, Jim. So, The Stainless Steel Rat, The Adventures of Jim DeGriz, the thief turned government agent. So that was when I was really young, a young teenager. And also while I was a teenager, I remember I was 15 when I read this. I read the Lord of the Rings. So the Lord of the Rings, I read this copy as well. And I remember it took me 3 months to read the book, the 3 books together. 3 months. And I was really chuffed when I read it, because it felt like a real achievement at the time. And it started my love of fantasy. So after that, immediately after that, I read the Belgariad. And then I also read The Sword of Shannara, which I noticed that Bookish Chaz talked about that book recently. And he said Shannara. so I don't know what's right. But I used to say Shannara. I don't even remember anymore. I think I said Shannara when I was a kid. Anyway, whatever the right pronunciation is, I loved the Sword of Shannara and the Elfstones of Shannara, and the third one. What was the third one called? Elfstones of Shannara. The Druids of Shannara? No, I can't remember what the third one's called. The third one as well. Those are the only three I read, but I read them when I was about 15 or 16 and absolutely loved them. And then, you know, because at the time I was reading more fantasy than science fiction. It ended up flipping into science fiction more than fantasy very quickly. But those were really important pieces of work for me as a reader. But obviously started with Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Okay, so two other mentions I wanted to make at this point in the chronology of me as a reader. And one of the things that I used to spend a lot of time reading and doing, because it's like activity reading, was the fighting fantasy books. So anyone that was in Britain that was a big fantasy fan of my age, so anyone who's now in their 50s or late 40s who was in the UK at that point and was a fantasy fan, probably had the fighting fantasy books. It's your classic kind of choose your own adventure, where if you want to open the door, go to 26, and you go to 26 and it says you open the door and there's a casket. Do you want to open it? If you want to open the casket, oh, it's locked. Now you have to roll the dice to see if you can unlock it. Oh, you've unlocked it. Oh, it's poison. You're dead. And those books that were basically crossover between a book and a game were a lot of reading, and there were some technical words as well, like all the monsters and the spells and all that sort of stuff that were in there. So it did actually help you to read better. But ultimately, it was a game. It was a game you played solo. It was a fantastic thing. Absolutely loved it. And everyone I knew, all my mates played it as well. All these different books. And my favourite was Death Trap Dungeon. Death Trap Dungeon was my favourite one. And I absolutely loved it. I played that so many times. It's just awesome. So, yeah, I mean, the Fighting Fantasy books, if you remember them, then leave a comment below and say, I remember those. Steve Jackson and Ian Livingston, two people that were from Games Workshop. Games Workshop created Warhammer, which you might know Warhammer. They also created the greatest board game of all time. And at some point on the channel, I've been putting it off a little bit because it can be a bit of an ambitious video. I'm going to do a video about that game, that board game that they created, which is just insane. It's the thing I've done the most in my life, actually, because I've played that game millions of times, hundreds of thousands of times since I was 13. I've still got my copy of that game from when I was 13. So anyway, Games Workshop produced lots of great things, but one of the things it did produce was Steve Jackson and Ian Livingston's Fighting Fantasy books, which were amazing. Okay, so moving forward, as I leave school, actually not necessarily as I leave school, as I'm, like, again, still 15 or 16 really, I discover two very important people in my life. Two of my all-time favourites, and the person I now keep saying on the channel is my favourite author, but someone that's up there as well. And I read my first books by Ray Bradbury and Harlan Ellison. This is when I'm a teenager, so I find The Illustrated Man and I read The Illustrated Man, which is my first Ray Bradbury book, and it's that imprint of The Illustrated Man that I read as well. I've got a few different copies of it now, but and you probably know on the channel I'm going through a big Ray Bradbury readathon where I'm reading everything that he's ever written, and I don't know, 6 books in or something. So The Illustrated Man was really, really important to me. And All the Sounds of Fear by Harlan Ellison was the first Harlan Ellison book I read, and I've been collecting him ever since. And this book contains, can you imagine, I was like 15 when I read I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. What? I mean, it really did blow me away. It's got that on it. It's got the Discarded, which is really important. It's got All the Sounds of Fear, which is really good. But it's also got my favourite Harlan Ellison story, which is Repent Harlequin, Said the TikTok Man. It's got Bright Eyes, which is another really good one. It's a really important book, this one, All the Sounds of Fear. And that was the first Harlan Ellison book I bought. Okay, so around that time again, this is really important stuff that really did have a huge influence on me. I also read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I've cheekily got 2 copies. But The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was very, very important because ultimately humour is a massive thing for me. I'm a massive fan of Monty Python. Another thing that I read, which was very important to me, was the Spike Milligan books. So I read Spike Milligan stuff a lot, and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy stuff. I was also a huge fan, not reading, but watching the Marx Brothers stuff as well. So that was a big deal for me. So all that kind of sense of humour was a big deal. And actually, that's obviously had a big legacy because most of what I've written as an author has, as far as short stories and novels go, is humour. So not always, but a lot of it. The poetry stuff is very serious, but the short stories and novels have mostly been humorous. So these guys have had a big effect on me. So I think The Hitchhikers has probably had the biggest effect. So it's, you know, iconically funny. Everyone loves it. It's legendary book, and people talk about it all the time. People who haven't discovered it but know about it go, oh, it's about time I've read that, and and it still doesn't seem to be that dated because people still say they love it. And people who say they don't like humor in books still seem to like this one. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books were very, very important to me. Okay, so we're going to turn a different corner now. This guy is very important to me. This is the first book I bought by this guy, and he had a profound effect on me during a very difficult time in my life. And I've actually scheduled up a video that I filmed about a year ago, and I keep putting it off. I keep moving it in the schedule because I'm a little bit nervous of it going out because it's very, very serious, and it's about a very dark time in my life. But it's about, the reason why I did the video is I wanted to talk about Charles Bukowski, and I didn't want to talk about Charles Bukowski without talking about his effect on my life. And basically, without being too dramatic, this author saved my life. So I'd kind of explain in the video that you're going to see later on how he saved my life. But I'll always be grateful for this man's work's effect on that, because it was a very, very dark time, and I don't know what could have pulled me out of it, but he did. So the first book I bought by him was Notes of a Dirty Old Man, and this wasn't the thing that pulled me out of that situation. That was a book called The Most Beautiful Woman in Town, and specifically a film that was based on those stories called Crazy Love. But I'll talk about that on this other video that you'll see soon. It's going to go up. I've been pushing it away and moving it around the schedule, but it is going up literally either this month or next month. So you are going to see it soon. But Charles Bukowski had a huge, huge effect on me. So I am going to, part of the reason as well why I'm putting this video up is that I'm going to speak about him more next year, and I'm going to revisit the books, and I'm going to see how I feel about him later on in life in 2024 when, you know, post Me Too movement and all that, and see if he has the same effect that he used to, because also it's that kind of intense cynicism and honesty that's in his books was exactly the right thing for me when I was sort of 19, 20, but I don't know if that would sit well with me now. So it'd be interesting to find out. So I'm going to rediscover these books next year, which is why I scheduled that video up. But I had to face the big thing about him that makes whatever I think about his books now still sitting alongside a long-term debt of gratitude to him. So there we go. But Notes of a Dirty Old Man was the first book I bought by Charles Bukowski. Okay. I'm going to go to a hugely important history book. This is representing my delve into history and when I did my A-level, and I really got into history in a big way. And the reason I'm choosing this book is that I think this book gives you such an insight into the way that imperialism, colonialism, and the way that we interact with other countries, often negatively, can have a long-term effect, and how it affects the world today and the world stage today. And that book is The Scramble for Africa by Thomas Pakenham. It's an incredible book. It's a big old tome that talks about how different countries in Europe basically fought to occupy and overtake and own different parts of North and South Africa, or North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. I shouldn't say South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and the way that that all worked, what they were trying to get out of it, what they got out of it, how they treated the people that they found there, and the effects of imperialism basically and colonialism. So it's a fantastic book, and it does explain so much about how Africa became what it was, but a very good example of my love of history. Okay, so a couple of other non-fiction things that were seminal in my becoming an adult. Two big parts of my belief system, if you like. So one of them is my attitude to animals, and I'm not a vegetarian. I tried to be a vegetarian for 18 months. I couldn't hack it. I couldn't do it, and I didn't feel like I was doing it very well, and I wasn't very healthy. But more importantly, I just didn't have the willpower to do it. So I have a lot of admiration for vegetarians. But one thing I do feel very strongly about, and that's basic rights to the great apes. I mean, basic rights for all animals, really, but the apes especially, because they have like books like this are evidence of their likeness with us, and if we deserve those kind of rights, so do they. So Reaching into Thought, The Minds of the Great Apes is an absolutely amazing book. I've talked about this book before on the channel. Most of the time I talk about non-fiction books, I talk about this book. It's such an important and brilliant book, and it's very detailed, and it tells you what their societies are like, how they think, how developed and strong their cognitive abilities are, and why they deserve our respect and in some ways our admiration. So Reaching into Thought, The Minds of the Great Apes is an amazing book I definitely recommend, by some relatively local scientists. So Reaching into Thought. And then the other thing, which again, I have a very strong interest, in philosophy, and a distant interest in theology from an atheist perspective, and all of that culminates in my absolute love of this book, The Secular Bible. It's a fantastic book that basically says, if you feel like you want to have a serious discussion with someone that's on the Christian side about Christianity, then you have to know what you're talking about, and this book will help you do that. So this is like information and explanations about how the Bible was written, and what is in the Bible, the contents of the Bible, from an atheist kind of outsider's perspective. So from a non-believer, here it goes. Like, why non-believers must take religion seriously. That's like the subheading, and it's such a brilliant book. And it was such an eye-opener, because it made so much sense after I was just thinking, well, if that's true, then how does that work, and what's that about, and why is that a thing? But this kind of explains how crazy the creation of the Bible was, and why it does contradict itself, and all that, and why there's so many holes in it. It does make sense once you know how it was written and all that kind of thing. So that's a really good book. So that was really big on my development as a fully grown man. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about, just to finish it off, is my love of cartooning, because the biggest part of my book collection are my cartoonist books. And you may know that my favourite all-time cartoonist is Charles Addams. But my first ever cartoonist book was this one, and this specific copy as well, is Nothing Sacred by Gain Wilson. I absolutely love Gain Wilson. And I was just around my friend's house, and he was like, and I said, oh, what's this? And I started looking at it, and I absolutely fell in love with it straight away. And I was looking at it, and he said, oh, I don't really want that. Do you want it? And I said, oh, yes, please. And then he just gave it to me. It was falling apart a bit. It's not, the condition's pretty bad, but it was this condition when he gave it to me. So I was very grateful to him. I thought that's an amazing thing to do, but I have been collecting his stuff ever since, and I've actually got a better version of that now. So I found it quite recently, actually, with really good condition. So that was really good. I was so pleased to see it. So It's Nothing Sacred is a very important book to me because it was my first ever proper cartoonist book, and obviously since then I've bought every Far Side book. I've got every Charles Addams book except for 3. I've got 3 to get, and they were very rare. And I've got tons of Gay Wilson, tons of Dan Ferraro, Bizarro ones, tons of other ones as well. Loads of New Yorker cartoonist books, just in general. About last time I counted, it was about 130 books I had in my cartoonist collection. So this was the first one. And then just to sort of finish that off on that note, the first ever Charles Addams collection that I had was this one, which wasn't released when Charles Addams was alive. This came out in 1991. So 1991 marks the first time I started my Charles Addams collection. So there's the Addams family there. But this is a collection that was brought out afterwards. It's just like a greatest hits, if you like. And it's obviously got classic Charles Addams cartoons in it. I'll give you that one with the caption. This is a lovely one there. Very subtle. And I think, yeah, this is the one that they ripped off in the beginning of the first film, where they're putting they're gonna put boiling oil, I think, or boiling water, maybe boiling water on carol singers. Absolutely amazing, and they do that at the beginning of the film. I always remember thinking, oh my god, they're literally paying homage to the original cartoon there, which is really cool. So there we are. So that was my first Addams Family book. So there we are. Those are the books that made me. Please comment below on anything that you thought was interesting in that lot. And thank you for watching. Thank you for all the support. Stay curious, everybody.
Paint me a picture